children under 3, especially toddlers, often have a very negative reputation, those terrible twos. We often think toddlers are unruly, that they're very egotistical, which they are, and they need to be for a while. We often think of them as being very difficult to handle, very difficult to discipline. Before the will develops, there is an energy that's directing a child's development. That energy is referred to as the hormone. The hormone is sometimes defined as a life force. And it's evident in all living organisms. It's that force that pushes that organism to become what it's supposed to become.
Dr. Montessori talked about the idea that we are able to touch the periphery of the child, the exterior of the child, if you will. And there's a center inside that child. And inside that center is the secret of childhood, this incredible bundle of energy that she called hormone. This is what is the core inside of each of us, that we're born with and given the ability to construct ourselves. No parent taught their child to speak or taught their child to move. It was because they're driven from inside.
Young children have a very active hormone. So children aren't being disobedient to adults. They're really obeying this very strong, very internal force that they can't deny. So a child that has to move all the time is being moved from inside to do that movement. That's the power of this hormone.
Nature knows that's the process and is putting that child on that path of development so that they can stand and free their hands. And then they can explore the environment, and that's when we need to give them materials to manipulate, to develop the control and coordination that happens.
The art of working with young children is to try to figure out what it is they're needing to do, they're being pushed to do from this energy, and ask them to do it. Freedom is a point of arrival. It is not where we begin. It is not a point of departure. And children are given various freedoms depending on their increasing ability to handle the responsibilities that come with those freedoms. Montessori talked about the development of the will, that as a child's will developed, their ability to make a choice and take responsibility for that choice, it had enormous impact on their ability to function in a social setting with a set of rules, accepting those rules gradually, whether or not they even agreed with them.
The child first starts out just lifting their head and then slithering. And you can't even notice it sometimes when they're slithering, and then all of a sudden you notice they're 2 feet from where they were when I looked last. And then slowly rolling from back to front. And eventually crawling and pulling up and attached walking and walking. And then beyond that, with the challenges of running. As soon as they walk, they want to start running and climbing and challenging themselves in more difficult ways. So we look at the whole continuum from birth to 3 in terms of gross motor, as well as fine motor. So the development of the grasps from reflexive all the way to a fine pincer grasp that they can learn by the age of 9 months if they're given the opportunities and the materials to help those muscles to develop and to help those neurological pathways to connect so that they can use their hands to affect their environment.
Movement is the key. It's through movement that we develop our brain.
An environment for young children really has to have enough space so that the environment itself is not an obstacle to their development. And often unconsciously we create those obstacles by making spaces too small or too cluttered or too crowded with furniture, so they really can't practice the movements they need to practice. Sometimes the obstacle is an adult's attitude. Stop moving so much. Stop climbing up and down off the chair. Stop pushing, stop pulling, stop climbing, stop. All the movements they need to practice. We often try to stop them because it's an annoyance to us. And yet we have to understand that to perfect their gross body movements, but also their hand movements, they have to practice, and they need a lot of practice. So the environments they need for the whole first 3 years are going to change significantly, but the change is based on their developmental needs. The hand is so allied to the development of the brain and the work of the brain that sometimes I think we shortchange it by not giving enough to the work of the hand. Neurologically, children can make what is referred to as a primitive pincer grip, which is a very flattened kind of index finger and thumb grip. That's a neurological acquisition. To move this from this real tight, flattened, pinched movement to a refined pincer, or what's called a mature pincer, is experience. That's not it creates a neurological pattern, but that comes from experience. This comes from neurological development. How many of our children are stuck here rather than being allowed to move to something like this? And it comes early. So we still, if you're a 3 to 6 teacher, you see children coming into your environments with very immature hand skills. It's simply environment that's caused that. It is not their brain. It's just their experiences that have caused that. During the second year, the child is becoming a socialized human being. Up until that point, they're very egotistical. But gradually they come to understand everyone in this group has certain needs, has certain rights, not just me. And as they understand that, this social development is occurring simultaneously with the hormone declining in its power and the will becoming stronger and stronger. And we support that development by giving young children choices, but also allowing them to experience the consequence of those choices. We empower them by giving them choices. You can do A or B. We've controlled the situation by the choices we give them, but we empower them to make that choice. You need to get off the table. Can you do it by yourself, or do you need me to help you? We're going outside. Can you put your shoes on by yourself, or do you need some help? That's a choice. So when we can empower them that way, we're also feeding this developing will, because they're making choices that they get to see the responsibility for. I think one of the secrets to making all of this work with toddlers is to have very few rules. We have one overriding rule. You may do nothing that hurts yourself, others, or the environment. If you think of that overriding rule, that gives you such a big parameter to guide this development. And we try to use a positive approach. We walk inside, we run outside, we talk inside, we yell outside. So we give them all of these limits, if we want to call them limits, by voicing them in a positive way. If children are living in an environment where there are no limits, where they can do anything they want, whenever they want, however they want, that is absolute abandonment, the greatest fear of a child. So that the limits that we do create, and there aren't very many, but the ones that are there are very clear, give a child a structure. Give them the security of knowing, this is what I can do here, this is what I can't do here. And gradually, they reach a point where they can consciously choose to obey that structure. Practical life with toddlers is interesting. It's often messy. It often involves a lot of water, and you just know that. You know that's part of the attraction of it to them. There's a lot of collaborative work around practical life in the beginning, and as the adult, we watch how their motor skills are coming along, how their cognitive skills are developing, and as they appear to be able to do bits and pieces of a piece of work independently, the collaboration diminishes and they take over more and more of the work So the next thing you know, they're doing the work independently. People marvel sometimes that these children are able to bake bread, for example. The smell of baking bread is a great aspect of a community. But this is a contribution they're making to the communal lunch. It's not something they're just doing for themselves. Their initial motivation, of course, is an egotistical one. But at the lunch itself, someone asks, "Who baked this bread today? It is so good. Thank you so much for baking this bread."
Bon appetit. You may begin to eat. Thank you for waiting. Pizza.
When I go into an environment, I'm looking for order and cleanliness and the appropriate materials for specific ages. One of the things that's challenging for teachers when they first come out of training is which materials do I have in my environment? However, you don't always have every single child that needs every single material that's in your album at the same time. So you have to look at the children that are there, that are present. Are there things on the shelves that children don't even look at or notice? That environment needs to be dynamic. It needs to change according to the child's needs. And that doesn't mean we change the entire environment every week. But it does mean that we have to observe, to pay attention to what the children are using, what they're not using, what they're misusing as well, because that can be also a flag telling us, okay, this is not an appropriate material right now. They're trying to use it and it's just not working and they're not getting anything out of it and they're actually being destructive with it. So it's not feeding a need. So I'm looking to see that the materials are connected with the children and somehow helping the teacher to understand that also, to train her to observe, to train her eye to see those kinds of things, what the child really needs in terms of their motor skills, in terms of their interests, because it's not only about ability and what they can do, it's also about what they're interested in. Children of this age are showing us every day what they need.
Can you see your face in the mirror?
Meeting the child's needs and realizing that they will get there one day. They have their own path. And they're also going to do it very differently than the way that you do it. So you're going to go in and you're going to, when you finally do give that button presentation, you're going to do it perfectly. And they're going to go in and they're going to pull and they're going to try and, rip that button off because they really want it to get out of that hole right now. And you're going to have to be patient with that and allow the child. And it's not that you didn't do your presentation correctly. It's that the child is learning and they're in a process. And we have to see what they need before we just step in.
That classroom has to be immaculate clean. You have to be able to organize the toilet education, toilet awareness, the snack, the food preparation, the practical life. In that toddler class, you know that at the beginning, the moment that that child goes into the environment, he will touch everything. Everything. In the toddler environment, there is no way you can say you cannot touch this. So I will start with very few things, with many conversations. Basically, it's a matter of order, routine, how to go into the toilet, how to take off your clothes, how to change your shoes. So there are so tiny little things that you have to do. So to establish a routine and to establish also the child feels very comfortable and the child feels that he can predict exactly what's happening in the classroom.
Order is extremely important for the child and in setting up the environment. So things need to be found in their place. And the adult needs to help in that process. With children under 3, we can't expect them to be putting things back where they are from age 8 weeks. It's a process that happens. And in a nido, it rarely happens. It's the adult that's keeping the order. But the child still needs to be able to find what they need to in order to satisfy whatever development is going on inside of them. So if they're working on that 4-finger to thumb grasp, They can go over and find the rocking base where it was. It's not going to move to a different area. Even though they can't put it back, they need to be able to find it there to satisfy their development. Then when they get to the infant community, they start to understand things can be found in the same place. This is how order is. It gives security to the child. They form points of reference that makes them feel more comfortable in their environment so that they can find things. And usually they don't learn how to put their work away until they're transitioning to the primary. That's kind of one of the signs that we know they're ready because they can do a complete cycle of activity. So in the beginning, they're just going over and working at the shelf, knowing where that item belongs. And as things move along, they might take that item to a rug or to a table to work with, and then it stays at the table. It doesn't get back. But at least they know that work goes on a rug or a table. That's a sense of order they've gotten from the environment in terms of the adults and in terms of other children. Then they start putting their work back on any shelf in the classroom. So that rocking base might go into the shelf that has shoe cleaning on it. Any shelf in the environment. But they've internalized that order that work goes on the shelf. They know that that work goes on a shelf. They don't go over and put it in the sink. They put it on a shelf because they've internalized that order. So they're putting it on any shelf, and then eventually they're putting it on the correct shelf, not in the correct spot, but on the correct shelf. Then finally it goes on that spot where it goes. Having works that are complete as well is important. So that means that all of the cloths for hand washing need to be present. Otherwise, the child can't be successful in doing hand washing if he doesn't have a towel to dry his hands. So we need to make sure that the child, when they're done, replaces those cloths. And if they don't, then we're replacing those cloths. If there are no more cloths, then we're removing the material somehow, putting it somewhere where it's not available anymore. Because the child doesn't understand there are no more cloths. They will go over and they will still try to do that activity. Being comfortable with getting messy. Being comfortable with letting children do things that aren't in your album. Being comfortable with allowing them to make mistakes, to see what happens if they do things in a different way. Things like that are challenging when you are working in a community. We have to give up a lot of control and be patient and breathe and have a strong center and be really grounded to accepting these children's possibilities and their accomplishments. And what an accomplishment is. An accomplishment is learning and having a smile and being joyful and feeling good about yourself. You're there because you're the support. And you are the one that prepared this physical environment so that the child can do that independently, can do that work, can succeed, and can gain that feeling of normalization, of using their mind and body together to be a happy human being. That positive experience of being able to do for himself and to succeed without anyone interrupting is going to stay with him, and that's what we want him to take away.